I'm going to introduce the speaker today, who is Dr. Marion Chidarasvi, who is an art historian specializing in the art and architecture of Mughal South Asia. She regularly teaches courses and lectures on Islamic and Indo-Islamic art at universities and museums in London and Oxford. And works for the Nasser D. Khalili collection of Islamic art and is the in-house editor for their publication series. She is also an assistant editor for the International Journal of Islamic Architecture. In 2019, she guest edited a special issue of South Asian Studies titled Resituating Mughal Architecture in the Persianate World, New Investigations and Analysis, in which her article, From Function to Form, Chinkana in Safavid and Mughal Architecture, appeared. She's currently co-editing a special issue of the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society on Persianate painting, to be published in 2020. A selection of her other publications include Patronage's Power, Power and Appropriation, Constructing Jahangir's Mausoleum, A Sultan Before Padshah, Questioning the Identification of the turbaned figure in Jahangir preferring a Sufi sheikh to kings, and Where is the Greatest City in the East, the Mughal City of Lahore in European Travel, Accounts between 1556 and 1648. Mehreen has shared her academic expertise with wider audiences through her participation and consultation for documentaries of the Taj Mahal, programming on BBC World Service Radio, BBC 2 and BBC 4, and as an expert lecturer on cultural tours. So actually the reason I think that Razi Ahmad of LLF asked me to do the introduction is also because Mehreen and I co-designed and lecture on a course at the Courtauld Institute of Art called Imagining the Moguls, where Mehreen actually, it's quite a political course, so it's about Mughal art and architecture, and that's what Mehreen lectures on, and then I fill in with modern and contemporary Indian and Pakistani art. And so I'm very excited to welcome Mehreen onto the stage to give her talk.
Thank you so much, Zehra, for that introduction. Can we have the lights off, please? You'll see the pictures much better when the lights are off. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Okay, there might be an issue with the lights. So I will just go ahead and start. Thank you so much for being here this morning. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you to Razi and LLF for the invitation to come and speak to you about Jahangir's Mausoleum, which is one of my pet projects. And can I first ask, for those of you who are from Lahore, how many of you have actually been? Excellent. Okay, this is very exciting. Because when I first started studying this mausoleum in 2007, I came to do my first research trip in 2009, and it seemed to me that not many people had actually been to the mausoleum. So I'm very pleased to know that most of you have, which is great. My PhD was actually on this tomb, so I'm very happy to be able to speak to you about it. But before we jump into talking about this actual mausoleum, which is, of course, Jahangir's in Shadra, built between 1628 and 1638. I just want to talk to you a little bit about the importance of architecture in the Mughal period, and specifically its importance from a political point of view and a symbolic point of view. Because when we're talking about Mughal architecture, you need to think about these structures as visual stamps on the landscape of power. The person who has built the monument gets credit for the monument. So it's not that, for example, when we think of the Sistine Chapel, we think of Michelangelo. When we think of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, we think of Sir Christopher Wren. We think of the artist, we think of the architect. when we are talking about Mughal monuments, for the most part, we don't know who the people were who actually built this. We think of the patron. We think of the person who actually commissioned the structure. So there's this very potent symbolic importance of actually building in the Mughal periods, because it's the person who built it who gets the credit. And so it's this idea that through the construction of buildings and through the construction of spaces, you're creating longevity for yourself. You're creating spaces through which you are going to be remembered once you're gone. And we know that this held specific resonance for two of the key figures I'm going to be talking about today, the Empress Nur Jahan, Jahangir's last and favorite wife, and the Emperor Shah Jahan. Both of them viewed buildings in this particular fashion. Now, in terms of mausoleum architecture, funerary architecture, this symbolism becomes even more potent, because a mausoleum, by its nature, you're building to commemorate the person who is buried there. So you are commemorating the deceased. But as the person building it, you are also getting this commemoration. And in funerary architecture, there's this extra religious layer of importance, because in South Asia, there is this, what's the right word? I sometimes forget very simple words. There is this idea associated with the funerary monuments of the rulers that they become effectively shrines, because there's a very established shrine culture in the region, and the Mughal rulers, when they are deceased and when they are buried, you have shrine activities taking place at their mausoleums. So the concept of barka, of this spiritual emanation from the person who's buried there, and when you visit the shrine, you benefit from that. As the patron of the site, you benefit from that. These Mughal mausoleums become parts of that wider culture as well. And so you will see people, when you go to these sites, going and they will say a prayer at the base of the sarcophagus or the cenotaph. They will go and they will ask for blessings and benediction and aid. And so these particular sites are very charged politically, symbolically, and religiously as well. Now, Jahangir's mausoleum, if we think of the Mughals, we're talking about an empire which lasts from 1526 to 1857, 1858. So what is that, 350 years roughly. Of that time period, there are only 4 monumental imperial mausoleums which are constructed. And when I say imperial mausoleum, I mean where the emperor is buried. And these all happen in the first 180 years of the Mughal period. So the first of these monumental mausoleums is the tomb of Humayun in Delhi, which was built by Akbar. The tomb of Akbar in Sikandra, which was built by Jahangir. The tomb of Jahangir here in Lahore, which history tells us was built by Shah Jahan, for which I'm going to dispute, and the Taj Mahal in Agra. And we need to remember that with the Taj Mahal, it's actually a special case because it was not constructed as an imperial mausoleum. It was constructed as the tomb of the Empress Mumtaz Mahal, but when Shah Jahan died, he is also buried there. So it becomes an imperial mausoleum. It becomes part of this corpus. Now, if you look at the 4 of these, they are quite different. Visually, the largest resonance is between Humayun's mausoleum and the Taj Mahal. And there's a very purposeful reason for that, which I don't have time to go into. But what you can also see is that when you compare the 4 of these, Jahangir's, I'm sorry to say, is the least impressive. Right? It's a platform tomb. It's got 4 minars on it. As of today, there's nothing on top. There was something there originally, which I'll come back to. But it is, on the whole, you know, it's not as impressive as the other 3. And it's also the smallest of these 4 as well. And these are issues which started raising questions in my mind when I began to look at this particular structure. So, as I said, history tells us that these 4 mausoleums were built by emperors. The tradition that we have established, and tradition and precedence plays quite an important part in the establishment and creation of Mughal architecture. So the precedent and the tradition appeared to be the case that the son built the tomb for the father when they were deceased. So Humayun's was built by Akbar when Akbar came to the throne. Akbar's was built by Jahangir when he came to the throne. Jahangir's, as I said, is said to be by Shah Jahan. And the Taj Mahal is a special case because it wasn't actually constructed as an imperial mausoleum. Just to finish the picture, Babur's grave is in Kabul, and it's a very small monument comparatively. Aurangzeb is buried in Dalatabad at a Sufi dargah, and the rest of the emperors who follow are either also buried at Sufi dargahs, but most of them are actually buried at Humayun's mausoleum, which is why we only had these 4, purpose-built monumental spaces. And so it's the 3 emperors I've highlighted on the lineage at the top, which gets credit for these 4 particular structures. But there are many peculiarities about Jahangir's mausoleum. And a theme or an idea I'm going to come back to is why do we have these peculiarities, which I'll mention in just a second. Why are they there? And most importantly, if this is built by Shah Jahan, because all the histories of the period tell us that Shah Jahan ordered the construction of this mausoleum, it was built in 10 years, and it cost 10 lakhs. This is what history tells us. The building tells us something different. Because, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's on a smaller scale than the rest of them. It is peculiar in its simplicity compared to the rest of them. For those of you who have been and you've seen the structure, it's a beautiful, beautiful space, but it is not visually of imperial quality, especially the imperial quality of Shah Jahani architecture. And Shah Jahan associated himself with architecture very strongly. And we know it from his court histories. I have a quote coming up in a bit. He identified buildings with himself. And there's this idea that the perfection of his rule was reflected in the perfection of his artistic commissions, not only architecture, but in painting and objects as well. And so when you look at a structure like this, and you see these little imperfections in the architecture, the less than imperial nature of the decoration, how can he have been the patron if this is something which is supposed to be reflective of his imperial quality? So just to show you a bit more of this before we start discussing it further, the mausoleum is built in the center of a charbagh garden, a classic Persianate garden divided into 4 quadrants, and in this particular case subdivided even further by water channels and walkways. The decoration at the mausoleum includes mosaics, tile mosaic, which you see here, and fresco painting, which you see here. So these are some of the most elaborate examples. This is in one of the corridors leading to the central tomb chamber. But in every chamber which surrounds the mausoleum, there's also fresco paintings, and the arcade which surrounds the mausoleum on the interior is lined with a tile mosaic dado as well. And then some of the details of this decoration. The facade of the mausoleum is red sandstone inlaid with white marble, and also bluish gray marble as well. In these design schemes, which are very traditionally of the Jahangiri period, in the Chini Khane design, which is in one of the titles of the article, as Zehra very kindly mentioned. Chini Khane translates as China room. It refers to this decorative device in which you have the facade or the impression of displaying fine porcelains and chinas, and it becomes quite ubiquitous as a decorative scheme in Mughal architecture. So you have the facade. The interior on the bottom right and bottom left are 2 examples of some of the fresco paintings, a detail of some of the tile mosaic, and the top right There's one area of the tomb in which white marble predominates, and that is the tomb chamber. And the sarcophagus of Jahangir as well is inlaid in pietra dura, which is an Italian technique of inlay in which very fine slivers of semi-precious and hard stones are fitted together to create the design. And so it differs from regular mosaic work, because in the mosaics you have a single piece which will create a leaf or a petal, whereas you can see from the detail at the top, one petal is made up of multiple slivers of stone, and in the finest examples, you can have up to 30 tiny slivers of stone used to create one petal. And it gives this incredible naturalistic, realistic effect to the pietra dura designs. This is a view of the top of the mausoleum. We can call this a platform tomb. And at the top there is this small chabutra, this small platform in the center. Today this is how you see it. It's bare, but you can see that there are steps, I think, leading up to the platform. And initially the cenotaph, the false grave marker, was located on top of this platform. So there was a superstructure. There are two likely possibilities for how it looked. You had the cenotaph, and then you had either a railing around it on top of the platform, but I think it's more likely that there was a small pavilion that was built over it. So when you looked at the mausoleum, you actually had another small building on top, which would have made it a more impressive sight to see. And just to give you an idea of what this potentially could have looked like, this is the top of Akbar's mausoleum in Sikandra, where one of his false grave markers is at that very top level. And in his case, you had this white marble pavilion just lined with jalis, which was placed at the top around this, giving it this element of distinction to the site. And when there was an intervention, when was the intervention at this top level on Jahangir's mausoleum? This is a painting in the collection of the Royal Asiatic Society in London, and I love the fact they hang it in their lecture hall so anyone who comes in can see it on display. From the detail, you can see that we're just looking at the chabutra. There's nothing on it, there's nothing around it. So certainly by 1770, we know that whatever intervention happened had occurred, and the top platform level had been removed. And this very likely occurred after 1758, when Lahore was taken by the Sikhs as a Sikh city and had exited out of the Mughal hands. So, coming back to the mausoleum then. Well, there's three major characters that we're going to talk about. One is obviously Jahangir, it's his mausoleum. But the two key players who are the crux of this, this discussion and this tale are the Empress Noor Jahan and Jahangir's son, and for quite a long period of time, his heir apparent, Shah Jahan, who was named Prince Khurram and titled Shah Jahan in around 1617. Now, there is I'm going to get a bit familial here. When Jahangir married Noor Jahan, in 1611. She was his last wife. She was his favorite wife. She became very powerful at the Mughal court. She held a lot of power, as did her family. Her father, Itimaddud Dawla, he had been active in the Mughal court hierarchy during the reign of Akbar, Jahangir's father. It's when he and his family arrived in the Mughal Empire from Khorasan, he became one of the court administrators and began rising in the ranks. His daughter, Mehreen, was married to a soldier. That soldier was killed. Jahangir saw her, decided to marry her, and titles her first Nur Mahal and then Nur Jahan. you will sometimes read that the circumstances of her first husband dying were a bit peculiar once Jahangir had seen her, which is probably true, to be fair. So Nur Jahan and Jahangir are married in 1611. She receives this title, Nur Mahal, the light of the palace, and then Nur Jahan, the light of the world. Her brother, Asif Khan, he also is in the Mughal administration, in the court hierarchy. In 1612, his daughter is married to Prince Khurram. She is the one who eventually is titled Mumtaz Mahal, who the Taj Mahal is built for, and Prince Khurram at this time is very much the heir apparent of Jahangir. In this kind of political setup, Ittimad ad-Dawla, Jahangir, Nur Jahan, Asif Khan are all working in the same direction, with Shah Jahan named as the heir apparent, and they all are very happy with this. In 1621, Nur Jahan marries the daughter from her first marriage, Ladli Begum, to another of Jahangir's sons, Shahryar. And in 1622, Ittimad ad-Dawla dies. When he dies, Nur Jahan starts pushing Shahryar to be the next heir over Shah Jahan, because there's a recognition that Shahryar is quite a weak player, and Nur Jahan can maintain her power at the court, her influence in the court, much more strongly if he is the ruler and she is the mother-in-law of the emperor, rather than if Shah Jahan is the ruler. And such is Nur Jahan's power over Jahangir that Jahangir also veers in this direction, and a rift occurs between him and Shah Jahan, who is effectively banished to the Deccan. He's sent on a military campaign in the Deccan in 1622, at the end of 1622, and he's there effectively until Jahangir dies. I promise this isn't a soap opera. This is all real. So the thing is that imagine that you, as Prince Khurram, you've been titled by your father, Shah Jahan, the king of the world. You've been named the heir apparent. And then all of a sudden, you are not. And you're told to go away from the central power of the court, go to the Deccan, embark upon your military endeavors, so you're not in the heart of all the political intrigue. Shah Jahan did not like this. He was very unhappy about it. And while he is away, Asif Khan, remember who is now Shah Jahan's father-in-law, and his sister have a rift as well, because they are now working for different ideas about who is going to succeed Jahangir. And I could go on about that, but I feel I should move on more to the mausoleum now. What we see happen is that when Jahangir dies, and he dies in 1627, returning to Lahore from Kashmir, when that happens, Asif Khan, who is with the court, basically imprisons Nur Jahan so that she can't start any interventions in the succession. Shahryar is in Lahore. He takes the fort and the treasury and starts to try buying loyalty of the nobles for him to be the next emperor. And Asif Khan sends a runner to the Deccan to tell Shah Jahan, your father's died, come back and claim the throne. And so this political mess, when Jahangir dies, it leads to a small battle of succession, which ultimately results in Shah Jahan coming back, Shahryar getting imprisoned, getting blinded, getting killed. The little nephew of Shah Jahan, who had been intermittently put on the throne, because you must always have an emperor, was killed because he had been named emperor. And Shah Jahan takes the throne in Agra in 1628 and proclaims himself emperor. During that time, Nur Jahan has been imprisoned in Lahore. Jahangir's body is in Lahore as well. Asif Khan is now the father-in-law of the emperor once Shah Jahan comes back and claims it. And so this is this very kind of brief political, historical backdrop to the construction of this mausoleum, because it all plays into it. If you remember what I said at the beginning, this idea about buildings having this potent political symbolism and representation of political power, whoever builds this is going to get credit. And it's in the line then of emperors building 4 sons. But this is not Shah Jahani. So what we see is that with that political background, with this issue of the succession, we have these two figures who are then historically viable as the two options of who built Jahangir's mausoleum. And history, as I said, tells us it is Shah Jahan. The historical texts of the period, his court histories of the period, all state this. And I should say also in this court histories, he's quite venomous to Nur Jahan. There are lines in it in which he refers to her, equating her with Eve, saying that, you know, out of man's left side, the rib came, and it was evil. And this is in direct reference to Nur Jahan. So there is this clear hatred, I don't think it's too strong a word to use, for him when it came to her. And I just thought I would show you this incredible portrait of her on the right-hand side, in which she's dressed in male clothing, holding a gun, because she was said to be a very good shot. So, in order to make this a bit clearer, I want to show you first some examples of Shah Jahani architecture, because I want you to see how this does not fit into that architectural oeuvre. And then I want to show you some of Nur Jahan's, and then see the relationship there. Because the thing is that this is a very classic case of text versus image in terms of what the histories tell us, in terms of what the building tells us. And as I said, the building tells us quite a different story. So first, if we think of Shah Jahan as the patron of this mausoleum, if he is the one who actually ordered it to be constructed. Shah Jahan, once he came to the throne, his imperial ideology was one of representing the perfection of his rule, the perfection of his empire. And this was projected through the material culture which he commissioned and which he produced. And there was a very clearly defined aesthetic to his imperial architecture, which was composed of an aesthetic of white marble, a particular type of column. I won't get very heavily into the architectural details, but he used particular forms, particular designs, and white marble as a means to represent imperial space and his imperial commissions. So at the bottom we have these examples, contemporary examples, so buildings being built at the same time as Jahangir's mausoleum, and these all happen to be in Agra, but you can see the immediate visual aesthetic is one of white marble. And if I went in closer into these, you would also see pietra dura, that Italianate inlay work, which becomes a hallmark of his imperial architecture as well. And then, of course, the most direct relationship that we can make between Jahangir's mausoleum and Shah Jahani architecture is the Taj Mahal, because there's a 5-year overlap in which Jahangir's mausoleum is being completed and the Taj Mahal is being constructed. So we can actually see a mausoleum that we know Shah Jahan built and compare it to a mausoleum which he is said to have built, one for a queen and one for an emperor. And there is a drastic difference, as I'm sure you can tell. So I'm just showing you this interior shot of the tomb chamber at the Taj Mahal, in which you can see how luxurious this space is. White marble, pietra dura, calligraphy, these incredibly fine jali on the screen. It's a space which really projects imperial power. And this is kind of the epitome. Thank you so much. This is kind of the epitome of Shah Jahani architecture and Shah Jahani style. And then if you look at the two mausoleums side by side as well, you can see that they are completely different. The only parts in which they are similar, I think you can say, is the fact that they are both elevated, which was a standard part of Mughal architecture, and they both have the incorporation of minars, which, however, is slightly different because in Jahangir's mausoleum, they are an integral part of the architecture, and in the Taj Mahal, they serve as a framing device to the actual mausoleum. And then a few examples of Nur Jahan's architecture. she builds for her parents in Agra, when they die, a mausoleum, the tomb of Itimaduddaulah. This is a jewel box of a building. And if you look at it, you can see that you have the same aesthetic that we had at the Taj Mahal, white marble facing the structure, and the use of stone inlay as well. But in terms of its form and its design, you can see it's very much similar to Jahangir's. And there is, in fact, this body of 3 mausoleums, which are very, very similar to each other. Itimaduddaullah's is the first to be constructed, Jahangir's, and you can see that basically Jahangir's is kind of an expanded version of Itimaduddaullah's, just missing the top part. And Nur Jahan's tomb here in Shadra. So for those of you who have been to Jahangir's, have you also been to Nur Jahan's? Okay, a few of you, good. I very purposefully used an image which doesn't include the current facing facade which is being put on it, because the style of that is not Mughal. But you can still see that the form of the structure, the shape of the structure, the design, these are a body of 3 which go together. They were, conceived of as a group, effectively. And this is also true if we look at the decoration of the mausoleums. There is a particular aesthetic to Jahangiri architecture, to the architecture and design of buildings built by him during his reign and by Nur Jahan during his reign. And in other papers I've given and research I'm working on, I argue that that was a very purposeful connection, that Nur Jahan was projecting herself as an imperial patron as well, not just as a queen, but on par with Jahangir by making this visual relationship between her architecture and his architecture also. And so here we have this painting, or the slide I've already shown you, of an example of the interior decoration in Jahangir's mausoleum. And then you can see very similar design schemes and the combination of inlay work, mosaic work, fresco work in the interior of Itimaduddaullah's. And this is the interior tomb chamber at Itimaduddaullah's mausoleum. Oh, sorry. And again, just the details of the imagery, design, and decoration at Jahangir's, which you do not find. Except for the Pietra Dura, you don't find this for the most part on Shah Jahani architecture. Now, at Jahangir's mausoleum, you enter into it, you walk down a corridor, and you enter into the same central tomb chamber. And so that's what you see at the end of this here. And when you walk in, it's a completely different space to the rest of the mausoleum. The interior tomb chamber is completely lined in white marble, and you have this incredible sarcophagus in the interior, beautifully inlaid with Pietra Dura. This is a space which resonates as being Shah Jahani, and this, I would argue, is the space which he actually contributed to this mausoleum. So it's too much to give the full idea, but a shameless plug. I'm working on turning my PhD into a book on this, and so I hope that I will be back to be able to present that book to you. But it will go into much more detail. Thank you. It will give the full story to this discussion, because Nur Jahan, what I'm saying is that she has built this mausoleum, but the interior parts, the most important part, Shah Jahan contributed. And this is, if we go in a bit closer, you can see some of the decoration coming out of it. And in fact, a detail of the Pietra Dura, some further details there. This is exceptionally fine craftsmanship, very, very fine craftsmanship. And this is imperial quality. The decoration in the rest of the mausoleum is not. That was done by local craftsmen in the Punjab, in Lahore, working on this mausoleum, working for Nur Jahan. Whereas this was done in the imperial workshops of Shah Jahan and brought to Lahore and placed here in the mausoleum. And there would have been a matching one on the top of the roof, the false grave marker. And this fine sarcophagus, when you look at it in comparison to Mumtaz Mahal's, because they were done at the same time, so are Mumtaz Mahal's sarcophagus and cenotaph. And they were done simultaneously. And the work on Jahangir's is actually more fine than the work on Mumtaz Mahal's. The other ones on this side are Shah Jahan's, and they were put in later. And Ebba Koch, who's a specialist on Mughal architecture and the Taj Mahal in particular, she has commented on this, the fact that the pietra dura quality of Jahangir's sarcophagus is finer than that of Mumtaz Mahal's. So it is absolutely of imperial craftsmanship and was brought here and placed here. So this is Shah Jahan's contribution to this mausoleum, the interior of the tomb chamber. And then there's also a resonance between some of the designs, if we can say that, and that both Mumtaz Mahal's and Jahangir's have the 99 names and attributes of Allah put onto their sarcophagus and cenotaphs, whereas Shah Jahan's later on did not. Now, there are, as I said, elements of this building which are interesting, which are unique, and which call into question this Shah Jahani patronage. And I mentioned before that for Shah Jahan, buildings were key. They were key for him representing himself. They were key for how he wanted to be remembered. And in the Badshah-Nameh, which is the official court history of Shah Jahan, we have this quote, excuse me, written by his court historian, Abdulhamid Lahori. The mind of the emperor, brilliant as the sun, pays great attention to lofty edifices and strong buildings, which, as the saying has it, verily our monuments will tell of us, so our monuments will speak for us. They long speak with mute eloquence of their master's high aspiration and sublime authority. So very clearly stating the political tones of these buildings, the authority that he has as the emperor is built into their construction. And for ages to come are memorials of his love of land development, spreading of ornamentation, and nourishing of purity. So we have this wonderful little excerpt which speaks to how important Shah Jahan considered architecture to be for his imperial ideology and imperial representation. And as I said before, perfection of space, of design, was a hallmark of his architecture. And the perfection is lacking at Jahangir's mausoleum. And I just want to give you two very brief examples of this. Jahangir's tomb was constructed in a pre-existing garden, which Nur Jahan had owned. And so it's a pre-existing site, and the pre-existing elements of it had to be taken into consideration. Now, one of my arguments for the mausoleum not being imperial is the cost of it. The court histories tell us it cost only 10 lakhs. This is not a lot when we're talking about imperial commissions. So for example, there is a bazaar and mosque which Jahangir had constructed in Lahore when he was here, and that cost 20 lakhs. The Taj Mahal was estimated to cost 50 lakhs in and of itself. Nur Jahan spends 20 lakhs on the tomb she builds for her parents, which is not an imperial mausoleum. So 10 lakhs is really not a lot of money. And I would, I do argue that Nur Jahan is building this on a budget. She doesn't have the imperial treasury at her beck and call anymore. She doesn't even have her own finances because she was independently a very wealthy woman. But she's put on effectively an allowance by Shah Jahan when she's exiled to Lahore, and she can't access her own funds. And again, we know this through the court histories as well. So she's given an annual stipend of 2 lakhs in order to live off of. And so my theory is that 1 lakh of that was used per annum on the construction of this. So 10 years, 10 lakhs is what this took to build. And one of the oddities of it, which you can account for by the fact that you couldn't change, or she couldn't afford to change the pre-existing nature of the site, is that the tomb, when you enter, you're entering it from the west. Now, this is rare because all other Mughal tombs, you enter from the south. When you enter from the west, your back is facing Qibla. And this is not right. the fact that you have that, and especially when you think about the fact that these mausoleums have a religious element to them, the fact that you enter, your back is facing towards Qibla as you can't walk toward the emperor, there's a problem in the orientation of the mausoleum. And why was it done that way? Because of the pre-existing nature of the site. So a pre-existing garden, a pre-existing gateway necessitated how you would approach the mausoleum. Okay. And then one of the other oddities is that there are no inscriptions on this mausoleum. Other than the sarcophagus, there aren't any, and this is very, very rare. Taking into account how important precedence is when it comes to the construction of these spaces, you have the establishment of the use of Quranic inscriptions on mausoleums. And for example, I've given you two examples. At Akbar's tomb in Sikandra, you have Quranic quotations placed in the vestibule. On the exterior of Ittamad Dawlas, you have Quranic inscriptions. So Nur Jahani patronage, Jahangiri patronage. And of course, on the Taj Mahal, you've got Quranic inscriptions all over the facade and the interior. Jahangir's mausoleum is exceptionally strange in that the only inscription evidence that I have been able to find, other than the sarcophagus, is on this one panel on the gateway in which Allah is inscribed twice. That's it. And this is very, very rare. And again, if you think about how much this cost, if you don't have the funds to hire the calligrapher, to have the right materials for this, you can't make this kind of decorative device and symbolic device as well. I think I shall probably stop there to have some time for questions. But this is just to kind of introduce to you this idea that there is this ambiguity about, well, for me there's not ambiguity, but who built this mausoleum and the reasons for its construction are very, very potent and they're very important. And I would argue that basically, Nur Jahan is given permission to build this mausoleum by Shah Jahan. She couldn't have built it without permission. But when it is completed, he takes responsibility for it. He writes her out of its history by claiming in his court histories that he is the patron, that he commissioned it. Although it is not an imperial building, it is very inexpensive. And there's another element of this which I didn't have time to discuss, but it includes that fact that Asif Khan's mausoleum was incorporated into the site at a later date, and it disrupts the relationship between Jahangir's mausoleum and Nur Jahan's mausoleum. But that you'll find out about in the book. So thank you very much. Oh. And I also just wanted to show you this quote, which is attributed to Nur Jahan because it's beautiful.
So I'm just going to ask one question and then pass it to the floor because we don't have that much time and I'm sure you're burning with things to ask. So my one burning question is, what did Nur Jahan serve to gain by doing this? Do you think she didn't really have a choice? Did she know that it
Building the mausoleum? Okay. No, I think she absolutely had a choice. I think that Shah Jahan was taken up with other things. I think he thought she was exiled to Lahore after Jahangir's death. So I think that, if she could be kept busy, it was a good thing. So she wants to build a tomb, she's told she can build a tomb, and then it's taken away from her at the end. Because remember, she had the idea that you are remembered through your architectural patronage. And she was a great architectural patron herself. I didn't get a chance to show you anything other than her parents' mausoleum. But she builds quite vociferously. And to have the coup of building an emperor's mausoleum was, it was a really big deal. And so, she did it, and then she's literally written out of the history. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, my question is the opposite of hers. That what did Shah Jahan, I mean, given that he was so particular about his architecture,
yes,
why would he claim something that is clearly not up to his standard?
So that's where the betrayal in the title comes in. Yeah. Because genuinely, when I say he hated her, it's not too strong of an emotion to state. He really, really did. And so it's a very petty move, isn't it? It's not up to his imperial standard. It does not reflect his imperial ideology, and yet he claims it to take it away from her getting that credit and that kudos. And he is the one who has Asif Khan's mausoleum built right there as well. So that is Shah Jahani patronage. He orders it built in that specific location. So there's this wider context of also claiming the wider space of Shadra away from Nur Jahan, because it was a pre-existing garden of hers that Jahangir was built in, and also her mausoleum, I'm sure, was in a pre-existing garden of hers. So she had, you know, that area. She built her own before she died, but after Jahangir's. Yeah, yeah.
You showed two pictures of Nur Jahan, the butch one with the in the man's clothes with the
Yes.
with the gun, and then the one we. Can you go back one? The one just at the end.
Yes.
Is that a portrait, or is it? Oh, because Ruby Lal maintains there's only the butch one is the only one that actually looks like her. So was she gorgeous, or was she butch?
Oh no, she was beautiful.
Yeah.
She was beautiful. No. So the butch one, as you're calling it, is very purposefully. Yeah. It's very purposefully done this way. So Nur Jahan, she was imperial in a way that none of the other queens were. The amount of power she actually had, the amount of...
she was an empress.
She was an empress, like in every sense of the word. And so she then, by equating herself at that same imperial level, to have a portrait like this done, when this is a society which you know, uses purdah, that's remarkable. And to have a portrait dressed as a man is...
But she looks like a man as well as being dressed like a man.
Well, so it's a bit light. Sorry, it's a bit light, but there is actually a shadow of a breast. So the chest is evident, the female attributes are evident, and obviously the hair is tucked up inside the turban. So it's this, you know, ambiguity which is being presented. But
do you think the other one is a portrait? Go back to it. I've come across one reference in White Mughals to the mother writes to her daughter saying, if a female portrait painter comes, I will get her to make my likeness, implying that there were people who specialized in female likenesses within the harem.
Yeah, I gave a paper in Doha on female artists at the Mughal courts, because there were. And so we know that there were female artists who went into the harem and who made images of the women, which were then copied by the male artists. So for example, the Dar-e-Shikoh album in the British Library. Dar-e-Shikoh was Shah Jahan's eldest son. He made an album, which Jerry Losty says is a wedding album for his wife, Nadira Banu Begum. And in that, there are what have been identified as portraits of Mumtaz Mahal, Jahanara, and I just said her name, Nadira Banu Begum. So there are female artists present, and we have named artists, named women artists working under Akbar and Jahangir, and we have examples of their work. So it's entirely the case that this, could be an actual portrait as well. But interestingly, the portrait of her dressed in the male attire is signed by the artist Abul Hassan. Yeah.
And this one?
This one is, I'd have to go back, I think Govardhan. I have to go, yeah, here we go. No, I don't have the name of the artist.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
regarding the structure that might have been on top, are there any textual or like visual evidence of this? And why wouldn't there have been?
So there's no textual evidence. There's no visual evidence. My guess, and I've had some reconstructions made I think it was either just a simple railing or jolly screen like at Akbar's mausoleum, or something like this. And the reconstructions I had made, visually, the pavilion makes more sense. This kind of canopied pavilion, because it matches with the top of the minars, and it creates a much more cohesive look and gives much more prominence to the structure. So one of the other interesting things, again, speaking against Shah Jahan's patronage, is how much more is written about other structures in his histories, and how little is written about this mausoleum. Literally, he ordered it, it took 10 years to build, it cost 10 lakhs, it's in Lahore. You know, there's very little concrete information, and that's different compared to other buildings and spaces that he commissions.
Mehreen, could it in some ways also be because of his difficult legacy with his own father that...
Well, he wasn't involved in the construction, so he can't really talk about the construction, right?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on Nur Jahan, the 20th wife of Jahangir, by the way. And these 19 wives were made as part of alliances and marriages, and this was the first love marriage that Jahangir always desired. But the portrait is signed by the artist, the male one with the male dress, and it has a date. So I think some of the mystery that you are talking about can be revealed through the time as well, that it is 1612 and 13. Because there were wars that she was, on an elephant at one point, and while she was in Punjab.
That's later than that painting, though. Okay, so that painting is done quite shortly after. They married in 1611, and so that painting was done quite soon after. And it's referencing, she was a great hunter herself, and again, the idea that women are supposed to be in parda, but she would go hunting with Jahangir, and he writes in his histories about the fact that with 6 bullets, she kills 4 tigers, and there's another, sorry? And there's another incidence of her, of how good a shot she is. Yeah. So what you're referencing is when basically Jahangir has been kidnapped by one of his courtiers, and Nur Jahan leads the rescue attempt, but that happens later than that painting.
But I think it's an important picture to diagnose and to see, because they're probably, being dressed as a male would be the opposite of what the culture was, probably, the male culture.
Absolutely.
The harem culture, rather. Okay,
For sure.
Thank you.
For sure, thank you.
I think we have time for one.
The microphone.
ये एक great critics हैं मुशक ख्वाजा साहब, he died. उन्होंने लिखा है अगर आज किसी शहंशाह को
My Urdu is not wonderful, so please can you do it in English?
I'm trying to, but my passion is not good in English, so I
Okay. but if I'm to understand what you're asking.
Someone can translate then.
Somebody can explain. अगर आज किसी शहंशाह को अपनी महबूबा से मोहब्बत हो जाए तो वो उसके लिए ताज महल आसानी से बना सकता है, ये कोई इतनी बड़ी चीज़ नहीं है. But he cannot make an artistic, जो creative art है, गुब्बारे खातर में जो बनाया गया है, वो नहीं बना सकता. उस दौर में जो लोग थे, बेदल, नज़ीरी, उर्फी, and this one, तालब आमरी, इन लोगों को किसने promote किया था उस period में? They have made more beautiful and creative work than this Taj Mahal.
I do need that translated, please. If somebody can give me the gist of the question, please.
I did want to ask you one question. That painting of Nur Jahan, in which she's dressed as a man by Abul Hassan, was it made with her consent?
Yes.
If so, why did she want to be shown as a
Power. Power. The fact that she is able to have herself, to commission a painting in which she's dressed as a man, holding a gun. There's no other Mughal woman, no other Mughal royal, princess, empress who would have been able to do that and get away with it. So, but can I have a translation of that question, please?
No, we do have time apparently to get that done, and for one more question as well. But we will get you a translation.
Yeah, I just tried.
Yeah, please. No, no. Okay, afterwards we'll figure it out. There are a few more.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, the lights are in my face. I can't really see where the hands are going up.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, in the beginning you mentioned that there was this baraka associated with mausoleums, and
Yes.
that there was, you know, that the Mughal mausoleums might start being used as shrines. But I was just thinking maybe initially, but if you visit the Humayun's tomb in Delhi, and there's the Nizamuddin
Yes.
Dargah, yeah.
Yes.
So there's a huge contrast. The Humayun's tomb is just, you know, curious tourists walking around. And I mean, it doesn't have that same feeling, obviously, that you get when you go to the Dargah.
No, of course.
So
Because
I was just going to ask that question, that I never associated Mughal mausoleums with anything Sufi, right?
Right.
It's more like a show of power, and there's not much humility there.
Right.
So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Were they ever considered spiritual in that way, or you know, was it something that happened more in the beginning?
No, that's a great question. Thank you. So basically, there's a couple different layers to that. I suppose the kind of quickest way for me to answer that is to say yes, they were. First by the Mughal rulers, the successors themselves, and then the idea spreads. So for example, in relation to Humayun's tomb, the court histories of Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, all of them write about going to the tomb, and they use specific language which references ziyarat and the specific acts of pilgrimage that you undertake when you go on pilgrimage to a shrine or pilgrimage to a religious space. So the specific terms and language are being used to describe their own visitations. And then when they go, they do the ritual circumambulation, they're giving out alms, so the ritual acts associated with the visitation of shrines, they're carrying out at the mausoleum, at Humayun's mausoleum as well. And then even now, when you go to these sites, I don't think I've ever been to any of them and not see somebody, kiss the sarcophagus symbolically or saying a prayer there. So the idea of shrine culture, which is so embedded in the fabric of South Asia for such a long time, because of the importance of Sufism and shrine culture, it very much, with the imperial mausoleums in particular, there was a very clear resonance between them, for sure. And that element of baraka, it was believed and it was felt at these sites. But then just a quick twist on that, Humayun's mausoleum is located where it is because of its proximity to Nizamuddin's Dargah. So the baraka emanating from Nizamuddin is perpetually blessing Humayun as well. And then it's this whole kind of feeding in of baraka and passing it on.
I think we might want to end it there, unfortunately, but thank you very much, Mehreen. This was absolutely amazing.